Hey friends, let's talk about different ways tech startups grew their user base, i.e. growth hacked their way to gaining as many users as possible. So let's first talk about Dropbox. Dropbox really found an interesting way to gain users mainly through referrals, and basically the concept was that if you wanted more storage, all you needed to do was refer Dropbox to a friend, and you can do that through the app, you can do that through an email or a link that they give you, and essentially what's really smart about it is that it's a win-win proposition, right? It's a win for the user because they don't have to pay extra to get more storage, right? And if you work in media where you need a lot of files, you need to store them, that's a no-brainer, right? And then at the same time, for Dropbox, it was almost free advertising for them, right? Or free user acquisitions. The only thing that Dropbox might be losing is the fact that their servers are going to be more loaded up with all the files that people will upload, but at the end of the day, those users that they gain eventually will funnel into people paying users, if that makes sense. So the second company we'll talk about is Airbnb. Again, another interesting way of growing your user base is really using other platforms to grow your user acquisition. And how Airbnb has done it is essentially partner up with Craigslist, have some sort of an API where every Airbnb posting automatically pushes out to Craigslist. That's really smart for many reasons, but one is, if you come to think of it, Airbnb and Craigslist in a sense is in competition with each other, right? Airbnb didn't think of Craigslist as solely a competitor. They actually saw them as an opportunity, right? Because if Airbnb didn't really integrate with Craigslist, imagine all the traffic that they've lost, both for their host, i.e. their users, but for them as a company as well. So in many ways, Airbnb utilized a different platform for their growth, or at least their initial growth, which is very smart. And just to hone in on Airbnb, imagine all the new users they gained through just the visibility of it. Seeing Airbnb from a Craigslist user, that will be quite interesting. So you click on the property, you land on Airbnb. It's essentially a free ad for Airbnb. So Slack's user acquisition initially was very interesting, although I wasn't a part of the beta program. How they've done it was basically to make it feel like if you wanted to use the platform, you needed to be invited. So there's a sense of exclusivity to it. And this can be a hit and miss, right? I think for some people, if the tool is very commoditized, something you'll probably use quite easily, there's less friction, you might sign up to a beta program. Whereas if you're a very high price point software, i.e. maybe you're targeting B2B stakeholders, exclusivity might not be the best route. But anyway, interesting incentive by Slack, and look where they are now. So next one, let's talk about Zynga. So they're the company that actually built Farmville. Now, if you started out in the old Facebook days, if you've never heard of Farmville before, essentially it's what it says. It's a farming game that was in the early days of Facebook. Everyone was playing it. Obviously at this point now you don't really hear because it's been, I don't know if it's been removed or if people still use it. Anyway, for Zynga it was a great user acquisition tactic because first of all they used Facebook's visibility and power to drive more users to use their game, and within that, the great thing about at the time whenever you signed up or played a game on Facebook, automatically that company will get your details. And at the same time, you'll get notifications every couple of minutes when there's a change that happens. Even when you're playing the game, updates would then drive onto your Facebook feed, which again would be in many sense free advertising for Farmville to your friends essentially. You even had the ability to share your progress within a Farmville. Maybe you wanted to show off how many plants you planted, for example. So yeah, just an interesting story there for Zynga. So the next tech startup we're going to talk about is Hotmail. So how they've done their growth tactic, which is very interesting, was very simple. They essentially have a call to action or link at the end of every email footer if you were using Hotmail. So imagine if you were sending an email to someone using Yahoo, and then you saw the email and there's a call to action. It's very likely at that point in time anyway, I would assume, I'm not sure, early 90s or mid 90s or early 2000s, people just clicked on things for no other reason. It was just a time of people being interested in things. We didn't care about spam. Spam wasn't even a terminology people used at the time, at least mid 2000s when I was using the internet. So I'd be inclined that they got a lot of traffic from that, and even if half of the people don't convert into using Hotmail, because obviously they use a different email provider, I can guarantee that a lot of people still registered. So it was a very, very left field, untraditional way of growing users. Again, so there's a consistent, so the next company we'll talk about Spotify, and this was very smart. I remember when Spotify first came out, at least here in the UK. I was studying music, so you can imagine the connection there was already quite solid. Just a great app software, your ability to find and listen to music that you want to listen to even though you haven't downloaded it within seconds, the ability to organize your music, create playlists. It was very smart. And at the same time, they had a very great referral scheme within the app, so you can easily invite your friends to use it. But more importantly, how Spotify really grew their user base was, again, using other people's platform, i.e. using Facebook as a way to gain that awareness to newer audiences. How it would essentially work is, the funnel is that you download the app, so you download Spotify, and for you to register, you can either use your own email or you could use your Facebook account to register. And at that time, I can imagine Spotify's marketing team or dev team were thinking, okay, let's try to reduce as much friction as possible. Let's give them the ability to register for an account using Facebook. So how I did it was register through Facebook, and what happened is whenever I listened to music or created a playlist, all those actions would show up in my personal Facebook feed. And I wasn't even aware of this till I had to check my own Facebook profile at the time, and I could see all the music I was listening to. Some of them were embarrassing to show, but anyway, music is music, and you're free to listen to whatever kind of music you want. But imagine, for Spotify's point of view, again, it's not free advertising because it takes effort and time to develop those aspects within the app itself. But if you come to think of it, in many ways, it's double down on other people's platform or another platform to gain users. Because if the audience is already there, why are we going to use a different medium to gain users, right? Let's be smart and find the path of least resistance to gain users, if that makes sense. It's such a simple feature, being able to register an account through Facebook. But I think in terms of the amount of awareness that they got and users, I'm assuming, was probably astronomical, I can only imagine. So another good point to mention is that the great thing about that whole user acquisition tactic was, if I wasn't a Spotify user and I saw someone's feed full of Spotify updates, it gave me the sense of how Spotify worked. So by the time I install it, there's less friction in me understanding how it works, right? The way it looks. So I can click on my friend's profile, for example, see that they created a playlist. I can click on that playlist and somehow still listen to these up to 30 seconds of each song. And then at that point, I would be inclined, obviously, to register for free or use Facebook. So there was, again, less friction there, right? And there was an element of almost introducing your user interface to the audience without even being a user. So just excellent. That's such a smart strategy. And finally, Reddit. Now, Reddit's all the hype nowadays, but when they first started out, from my research and my understanding is that the founders of Reddit, basically, what they did was, because it's a forum-based solution for people, it's about volume of people interacting, right? It's about interactions, and what they've done was actually create multiple fake accounts in order to show that there was a lot of engagement in the early days, right? Because if you don't have that initial interaction, when new users land on your website, the first thing they're going to ask, especially if it's a forum, is, well, there's no content here, there's no engagement. What's in it for me? Why should I use it? So that first impression counts, and there's a saying that you only make your first impression once, so it's very smart. Make sure, especially if you're a forum-based tech company, make sure there's actually communities there, there's people posting and engaging, because that's the foundation of your business or your proposition. So now let's get more practical and get into understanding how you can actually growth hack or gain as many users as possible for your company. So here's a couple of points, and some of these are very obvious, but we'll kind of expand on them so you can see the gist of what I'm trying to communicate. One is, really be creative. Think outside the box. Think of channels or avenues or marketing campaigns that maybe you haven't seen before, and even if it seems wrong initially, like partnering up with your competitor or using their platform to raise awareness, it might just work. So think of ways that aren't used yet, and maybe think of ways that have been done before, maybe combine elements of different ideas together, right? Another thing you can do is product-led growth. This is more of an intrinsic approach where you may already have the users, and those users are the one almost driving the growth of the company. One way of doing that is essentially really building that connection with your user, understanding how do they see the app improving, what can be done to improve elements of the app? How would they recommend it to another? What changes do they want so that they can use the app more, or the product more, essentially? So you're not just using the product, you're actually using the users that use the product to scale your user acquisition, if that makes sense. And then third point here is virality. And what that really means is, again, very similar to point one, think in ways where how could we communicate this product to as many people as possible in a way that's untraditional, and that can be talked about by the press, by journalists, by websites, by people on Twitter. What's a use or an angle we can take so that it has a virality loop to it. And then finally, I think of ways to partner or collaborate with other platforms or different businesses. Again, if you think of Airbnb using Craigslist, for example, through an API, that's very smart. Or most companies will be like, why should I partner with my competition? Like, they'll take my audience. But actually, if you really come to think of it, there is no competition. It's just one whole sector you're both in, and you can actually share your audiences, assuming that's their approach as well. So you can both win, you can both share your audience with each other. So what are interesting ways that you would grow a user base? I'd love to know your perspective, your feedback. If there's any tactics that I haven't talked about, leave them in the comments below. I'd love to hear it, and I'd love to engage with you. Thank you for watching the video. Until next time, peace and love, always.